Alright, time to get this started here. Okay. Alright, let's adjust it just a little bit. There we go. Not so much space above the top of my head there. Scoot over here. There we go. Alright. So, tonight's stream is going to be a little bit lighter than usual. This is more of a test than other types. I'm using some new streaming software. We'll see how well all of this works together, how well the stream looks in the end. Okay, so what are we looking at here? Well, actually, you know what? In order to tell you this, I'm going to have to pull up a page here, and let's see. I should have that right around here in my history. Okay. Gonna go ahead and close that. Hopefully that didn't mess everything up by closing that. Let's see. Okay. Nope. Yes. No. I cannot tell if I am still connected. It's worth a try. Oh my goodness, the internet is slow when I'm doing this, isn't it? Okay, well that makes sense. There we go. Okay, so what we're looking at is a place known as Waldron Island. It is the place where the author of this book spent a fair amount of time living in the San Juan archipelago of Washington. That's in Puget Sound. Now she was born Doris Wernsterdet. I've never been very good at those names. In Portland, Oregon. So she's an Oregonian. But yeah, so that's where she lived a lot of the time. Now let's see. Let's talk about why I'm talking about her. It is because of this book. Now this book right here is in fact a very important, informative book for me. It is, I think, probably the greatest book. Why are we... It's hard for me to tell if we're connecting properly here. Okay, but this for me was one of the greatest books that I ever could have run into, and I honestly don't remember how I came to have it. I'm pretty sure I still have it in storage somewhere. If not, I'm glad that I know where to find copies today. Yay. So this is something that was apparently part of the Weekly Reader Book Club. As you can see on this little one right here, the lower part there with the three sort of kids with their arms in the air. It says Weekly Reader Children's Book Club. Very easily could it be how I came into possession of this book. But nevertheless, this was a book which I absolutely adored and loved. Okay, so let's start. This is Andrew Henry's Meadow, written and illustrated by Doris Byrne. Until that spring, Andrew Henry Thatcher lived with his family in the town of Stubbsville. Okay, and I'm just taking a look at Stubbsville here, and it looks like a pretty little idyllic kind of town. Nice, small, nestled in the mountains, sort of in a valley. Sort of like the town I grew up in. He had a father and a mother and two older sisters named Marion and Martha. The girls were always with each other. He had two younger brothers named Robert and Ronald. They were always with each other too. Andrew Henry was in the middle. He was always with himself, yet he didn't mind. He had plenty of things to do. And you can see the two kids playing down, playing with a car and all that kind of thing. And Andrew Henry, nope, he's got himself a hammer, saw, and a board with a nail in it. Let's just say that Andrew Henry is, he's more concerned about fun than safety. Let's just put it that way. All right. Mrs. Thatcher was usually busy in the kitchen, but Mr. Thatcher was tired when he came home from work. He liked to read the paper and have things quiet. Marion and Martha liked to sew or try new ways to wear their hair. Robin and Ronald liked to play with toy cars and coloring books. Okay, we're just going to say briefly here that this is definitely, shall we say, a product of its time, written, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s, so we're going to forgive the blatant sexism that's going on here. Fine. Okay, so we're just in the introduction here. Let's get through this. All right. Mrs. Thatcher was unhappy when Andrew Henry built a helicopter in the kitchen. The helicopter had many fine features, and you can see that he's dropped a little parachute from there. And I've never quite understood why the helicopter has a wooden barrel with a broom attached to it, but I just think that's perfect. I love that. It's the way it should be. Nevertheless, she said to him firmly, Andrew Henry, I have work to do. You must take that thing out of the kitchen. Then Andrew Henry built an eagle's cage in the living room, and Mr. Thatcher was annoyed. It was a fine eagle's cage. An eagle would have liked it too, but Mr. Thatcher didn't. He told Andrew Henry to go outside and to take the eagle's cage with him. And I'm just going to point out that this particular dad, that was not my dad. No, my dad would have been like, all right, when you're done with the eagle's cage, how are we getting out of the living room? Yeah. Anyway, moving on. When Marion and Martha saw the merry-go-round Henry had hitched up to the sewing machine, they were upset. It went round nicely, too. But they told him to unhitch it and to do it right now. Okay, so let's see. He's got a pocket watch. What is that thing on the end there? Well, anyway, pocket watch, some scissors, looks to be a wallet or a pocketbook, a pipe. I don't even understand all the things that are flying off of the merry-go-round, but it's a merry-go-round made of an umbrella, and so why not? It's wonderful. All right, moving on. Robert and Ronald didn't even like the system of pulleys Andrew Henry rigged up in their room, although it could close the door, fetch the crayon box, and lift the table 1.5 feet off of the floor. They cried, "You're always spoiling our fun, Andrew Henry. Leave us alone." Well, okay. Struggle of the creative artist, right? Andrew Henry thought about it more and more. One fine spring morning, he made up his mind. Quietly, he gathered his tools. He packed his hammer and saw, his pocket knife and pliers, his big sack of nails, some bolts, nuts, and wire, and even a few lengths of stovepipe. "I'll build a house for myself," he said to himself. Oh, he'll build a house for myself, he said to himself. He went out the back door and down the path. He knew where he was going. All right. I like this. Man with a plan. No one saw Andrew Henry leave, except the Thatcher's dog, Sam. As usual, Sam started to follow Andrew Henry, but this time Andrew Henry told him firmly that he must stay home. Sam was a good dog. He sat down by the gate in the shade of the lilac bush and watched until Andrew Henry was out of sight. This is just setting a plot point for later, but still. Okay. Andrew Henry walked kitty corner through Burdock's pasture. That's diagonal for all of you not Andrew Henry heathens. And climbed up over Blackbriar Hill. That is beautiful. That's a hill that I would climb over gladly. Then he went out across Warzabisky Swamp. You can see the little Warzabisky turtle and Warzabisky frog there. And in through the deep woods. Finally, he came to a meadow. A stream wandered through the meadow, sparkling in the sunlight. On one side was a tall fir tree, straight and strong. Andrew Henry walked right over to the fir tree. He dropped his tools beside it and looked the ground over. "Here is where I'll build my house," he said to himself. He set to work, and before long, the house was finished. Might be skipping over a few things here, but we'll get to that later. The walls were made of clay and rocks and poles. The roof was made of fir boughs, and outside one window there was a fine landing field for dragonflies, and I love how you can see these little dragonflies landing there. I'm not sure how you attract dragonflies to a landing field, but you know what? Andrew Henry seems to be able to do all this stuff, so I'm good with it. But Andrew Henry wasn't alone long. Soon Alice Burdock stepped out from the deep woods. She had her bird things with her. Mr. Burdock, who was a farmer, didn't care for birds. They ate his cherries and scratched up his corn and nested in his barn. He put scarecrows in the cornfield and tied tin cans in the cherry trees to scare away the birds. He even kept 4 cats in the barn to discourage the swallows from nesting there. But Alice liked birds. She had brought along what she could. "Andrew Henry, will you build me a house too?" she asked. "Sure thing," Andrew Henry said. It was a nice house, especially for a person who liked birds. A ladder climbed straight up the trunk of the old tree to the house. There were plenty of bird baths and feeding stations. There were bird houses and a balcony for watching birds, and even a handy nest for Alice's binoculars when she wasn't using them. Okay, I have to look at this for a minute. Is that not... I mean, it's simple. So first he built himself a simple stone kind of hobbit house, I imagine it kind of being like. Then he built a tree house for Alice Burdock. But, it's not going to be all there is. There's going to be more. More coming. Next, out of the deep woods, came George Turner. He had most of his boats, all of his fishing poles, and his biggest paddle wheel. Mrs. Turner didn't like him to use these things in the bathtub. George wanted Andrew Henry to build him a house too. "Sure thing," Andrew Henry said. First they built a bridge over the creek. Then they built the house on the bridge so that George could be near the water. Now you notice that they're working together on this now. And look at this place. The house had docks for the boats and built-in fishing poles. The paddle wheel worked a fan to keep George cool. It was surprising how much power that paddle wheel had. Okay, I do need to stop here for a second. I'm taking a close look at this here on this this illustration here, and if you look in the center, you can see the paddle wheel sticking down. Okay, that's the large paddle wheel George brought with him, and then you can see the rope going up above into the pulley, and then it's transferred over to this other pulley, and then it's not going to work that way. It needs an extra. Okay, just trust me, we need an extra piece there for it to flap the fan, but close enough. I'll give Doris Byrne the credit. She illustrated and wrote this, and that actually is pretty good. A lot of the time, people just write, and then there's another illustrator nowadays, so you know what? She gets credit. Okay. Then Joe Pulaski arrived. As a mere, there are a few like Eastern European names in all this. They built him a dugout house. The door was on the roof, and the chimney stuck out of the ground. Joe wanted an underground house so his pets would be comfortable. He had gray mice and white mice, a pet mole, and a pair of brown rabbits. The house had rooms and passageways for his pets. The mole's passageways were wonderfully misleading. Okay, so now Andrew Henry has now built an underground home. Now, this one, I mean, I love the fact that you can see the burrows for the critters and all that. And at the same time, I mean, it is kind of a hole in the ground, and one hopes that if you're doing a tiny home that one does it a little bit more than just one single room hole in the ground. But on the other hand, Joe Pulaski's a kid. He's okay with this right now. That's what he needs. Jane O'Malley and Margot Laporte showed up next. Andrew Henry built Jane a house that looked like a castle with turrets. They dug a ditch around it, which filled up with water from the creek. The ditch made a useful moat, especially when the drawbridge was up. Jane had her dress-up clothes with her. She hoped her mother wouldn't miss them too much. She explained that they made her feel like Lady Jane instead of just plain Jane. And now Margot. This is where it gets funny and silly. Margot's house was tall in the middle like a teepee, but had a long, low entrance like an igloo. She needed privacy for her music. I think her music might not be the best. I mean, it is a tuba that she's playing at the same time with a partial drum kit and a triangle. But anyway, visitors had to crawl on their stomachs. They also had to give 3 toots on the horn she had hung beside the door. Sometimes Margot didn't answer because she couldn't always hear the horn when she was practicing. Down the hill, across the swamp and into the woods, came 3 more children. Sarah Lerner had a cookie sheet full of mud cakes her mother had made her take out of the oven. Don Peterson had a dresser drawer full of dandelion seeds he had been saving to use for parachutes. Stanley Hayes had the 2 racing toads his father wouldn't let him keep in the basement. Now, this is actually one case where I think there's more story here than actually is put into this book. I feel like there's certain publishing restrictions that occur due to sizes of books and how they're published and that kind of thing, and so without bumping up to another size, it may not have been possible to do this. On the other hand, she might have just said, okay, fine, I've told enough all this longhand, and now we're skipping to... Soon, 9 houses stood in the meadow. It looked like a small village. Okay, so let's go over all these houses because, let's be honest, this right here is, for me, the high point of the book. This is... They've come to Andrew Henry's Meadow. They've created their home. They've got their communities, their homes. They've got their community. So let's go from this side, where Margot's teepee is, to this side. All right. So starting on the right, okay, we have ourselves Margot's teepee for her music. We've got the tree house for the birds. We've got Andrew Henry's home. Then in the foreground, we have the burrow home for the rabbits. Then we've got the home on the bridge with the boat. So that is 5 right there. Okay. Then we've got 4 more. We've got the little castle for Miss Jane. Then we've got the little tent. Now, my assumption is these last 3 here, these are the ones that are for the ones that just showed up. So if it's a little tent, I'm thinking this is like the racing area. It's a little, looks like a little circus tent. This is where the racing toads are going to be. The next one up is kind of looks like a fire watch platform, but it has a little windsock on it and that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure that is the launching platform for all the dandelion seeds. And the last one is a pair of 2 small stone structures that I'm assuming one is an oven, maybe both, I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely a place where a girl who wants to bake her mud cakes can bake those mud cakes. So we have all 9 homes for the village. So what I love about this is each person is individual. The home is for who they are. I mean, this I think is where I've always wanted. This is where it's come from. People, so for a long time, I've talked about I want to start a commune, and by that I mean a community. Now, people thought I meant a cult, and certainly I have strange ideas about all sorts of things, so on and so forth, but no, it's not about a cult. It's about Andrew Henry's Meadow. and, well, making our own. I mean, and honestly, I mean, you look at them and you look at a tiny home, and tiny homes are not much bigger than these. All right. So, let's moving on. We're going to wrap up this book because it is a book for adults to read to their children. So we do need to go back to some things we touched upon earlier, the dog, stuff like that. All right, so let's get to this. But in Stubbsville, the Thatchers were looking for Andrew Henry. Their Burdocks were looking for Alice Soon. The Turners, the Pulaskis, the O'Malleys, the Laportes, the Lerners, the Petersons, and the Hayes all began looking for their missing children. And as you can see, they're all looking over the place. I love the ones who are climbing on top of their roof. There's like the ladder where you can see they're climbing up on the roof, and then the one in the very center, on another building where I think it's a woman in a skirt. She's just standing on the roof in the middle of town. Not sure what you're going to see from the roof in the middle of town, but good enough. They're looking for their lost children. I mean, you do what you can when your kids are missing. All right, so now, and I love this illustration. I love all the cross hatching in the dark. It feels like kind of some of those Edward Gorey illustrations. For 4 days and 4 nights, everyone searched frantically. They hunted in the fields, in the barns, the buildings, and the vacant lots, but the children could not be found. 4 days, 4 nights. So I guess they all showed up in one day, and they had the better part of a week there. The only one who wasn't searching was the Thatcher's dog, Sam. He sat quietly under the lilac bush by the gate. Sam was a good dog, but he was very lonesome. As he gazed sorrowfully out towards the far corner of Burdock's pasture, the lonesomeness in Sam grew and grew and grew. Finally, it grew too big even for a good dog. On the morning of the 5th day, Sam raised his head and poured out a long, aching howl. Not going to do that. I could probably sound really bad on this mic with that. He sprang to his feet and raced for the near corner of Burdock's pasture. The townspeople all heard the howl and saw Sam racing off with his nose to the ground. The dog has found their trail. Follow Sam. Hooray for Sam! Sam ran kitty corner through the Burdock's pasture. The fathers and the mothers, the sisters and the brothers, even the cats and the dogs of the missing children all ran kitty corner after him. The cats and the dogs came. Dang. They climbed up over Blackbriar Hill and went across Warzebisky's swamp and in through the deep woods until they came to a meadow. It was Andrew Henry's meadow. There were the children. And now in this one you can kind of see them better. They weren't visible in the other one. You can see a couple of them under the little parachute watching tower, and someone's talking with about the boats. Andrew Henry just standing in his doorway, kind of like, "Yep, looking good." Pulaski with one of his rabbits and showing it off. I mean, what kids do. What excitement! The 9 children, their parents, and all their sisters and brothers met with shouts of joy. They laughed and hugged each other. The fathers and the mothers were too happy to scold or ask any questions. Their children were safe. That's what you want. Andrew Henry and his friends were happy too. They had been away from home for 4 long days and 4 very long nights. The village in the meadow had been wonderful. They would not forget it. But they missed their mothers and fathers, their sisters and brothers, their cats and their dogs. They were ready to go home. The Thatchers gave Andrew Henry the corner of the basement behind the furnace just to build things in. He built a roller coaster for Ronald and Robert and Ronald's toy cars. By using a bucket and parts of an electric fan, he made a hairdryer for Marion and Martha. The pipe filler he made for his father worked the same way a bird feeder does. He was especially proud of the automatic table setter he made for his mother, although it did take up a lot of room. Andrew Henry was pleased to have such a fine place to work, and his family was always curious to see what Andrew Henry would build next. So, Andrew Henry gets to build stuff at home. I think what Andrew Henry really built was, a love for this kind of thing. So many of us. But let's be honest, Andrew Henry, just the character who built it, is the author. Doris Burns. Okay, so this is the blurb that is in the book. Since she was 9 years old and first set foot on a small island in Puget Sound, Doris Byrne wanted to live on an island. I think that's Waldron Island, the one that I showed you in the picture. She lived in Portland, Oregon, where she was born, and she attended the universities of Oregon, Hawaii, and Washington, where she received her degree before she found her home where she lives today. Well, this is a little bit dated. Andrew Henry's Meadow was created on Waldron in Washington. The island has no electricity, telephones, running water, or stores of any kind. Everything has to be brought in on the mail boat from the mainland, including the paper, pens, and brushes, and inks for her work. Mrs. Burns' studio is a small cabin where she spends the day at work after chopping enough wood to keep the fire going throughout the day, hauling 2 buckets of water from the pump for washing brushes and pens, and brewing a, quote, perpetual pot of tea, unquote. She looks out on the channel and the beautiful Canadian islands. Her 4 children attend the island's one-room schoolhouse where she previously taught for a year. Okay, so let's show the picture of Doris Byrne. That's a bit later on. I'm going to guess that's near the, she's passed now, near the end of her life. So let's pull up, where is it? There we go. So, let's go ahead and read this. All right, so she was born in Portland, Oregon, to Lage, I don't know how you pronounce that, Lage Ornstedt, an explorer, mountaineer, and U.S. Forest Service worker, and his wife, Adele. Sounds very, kind of Northern European, maybe Scandinavian, hard to say. The family resided on Guam's Island near Anacortes. After being interviewed by writer Jane Byrne for the Bellingham Herald, the Wernstedt and Byrne families became friends. The two had nearby summer cabins on Waldron, a small island without ferry service. Byrne attended the University of Oregon and the University of Hawaii and graduated from the University of Washington. She married South Bob Byrne after World War II, and the couple made their home on Waldron Island. She had 4 children, whom she taught for 1 year on Guam's Island's one-room schoolhouse. Byrne separated from her husband, but they remained lifelong friends and neighbors. Okay, so the kids get both parents. Works. Worked on her meticulous illustrations in the evening in, quote, a small cabin where she spends the day at work. Oh, yeah. And the bit about brewing a pot of tea. Perpetual pot of tea. Waldron Island was without electricity, telephone service, or running water, or merchants. All of her goods and supplies were brought to her by boat from the mainland. In 1956, wow, this was written earlier than I thought. Oh no, okay, not quite as I thought. All right. She took a portfolio of her illustrations to publishers in New York, was encouraged to continue working. Her children remember her working late nights by lantern light with a fireplace burning down to embers. Oh my God, this book was illustrated by lantern and sunlight. Can you imagine that? Okay. Her oldest son, Mark Nathaniel Byrne, was the inspiration for her first book, Andrew Henry's Meadow, published 1965. There we go. The story of a boy who, ignored by his family, builds a retreat for himself in a nearby meadow. He is soon joined by other children for whom he also builds houses tailored to their interests and hobbies. Andrew Henry's Meadow won the Washington Governor's Art Award and was a weekly reader club selection. It was reissued on a 40th anniversary in 2005 and again in 2012. She also wrote The Summerfolk and The Tale of Lazy Lizard Canyon and illustrated other books. Apparently her nickname was Doe. Doris Doe Byrne died at her daughter's home in Bellington, Washington on March 9th, 2011 at the age of 87. It's a pretty good run. At her daughter's home, too. Okay. So let's see. Collection of her work's been donated. That seems a little bit outdated. Actor Zach Braff has been adapting Andrew Henry's Meadow into a film for 20th Century Fox since 2004. That was 16 years ago now. Barry Sonnenfeld, signed on to direct the film in early 2010. I think we might not be getting that movie anytime soon. All right. So that is Andrew Henry's Meadow. Now I'm going to kind of wrap this up a little bit with some of the thoughts about Andrew Henry's Meadow that I have and about how this is. Well, okay, so there we go. That's a good shot there. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, that's another image that'll show up later. So let me move this. Oh, you can't see. Oh, no, that's the wrong thing. Still getting the hang of this. So that should be there. That should be there. And I'm going to move. That it? No? There we go. There we go. So now you can see a little bit more of the village. Okay, so first of all, one of the things that I appreciate about this is the fact that this really does show that, you know, any kind of person, a kid even properly inspired can make this happen. And I think that that's, you know, a good start. Another thing that I really appreciate about all this is just, I mean, the type of design that it is. I like the fact that there is a house that's on a bridge. I think that is just beautiful. I like the fact that they, you know, dug a moat around the castle. And it makes me think about all that wetland that we got out there in this part of Florida here, because it's going to need some help. So, as I've been looking at places for tiny homes, for a tiny home community, there are a couple of things that I have found here in this area. Was actually found by a friend of mine who showed me a spot that is currently up for sale, relatively inexpensive, but is crisscrossed with wetlands, which really makes it inappropriate for a lot of things. It also is, oh, it's a moth, also makes it so that it's a piece of land that might be workable for this, whereas it's not going to be workable for other things. So I really like the idea of having it set up as a tiny home community. One thing that it is not set up presently for is the proper zoning, and that is going to be a bit of an issue, but that's something that definitely can be looked at. That right now I think might be the best possibility. There are other places that I've been looking at. There are a couple of old mobile home parks and trailer parks. There's a 5 minute, like 3 minutes from where I am right now. And it's kind of nice. Problem is that some other folks created a design plan for it for putting a bunch of townhomes on it, and we'll see whether or not that's a thing that's going to happen. We are in a moment right now where getting money for a project like this is going to need to be something that probably is going to be coming from private sources. So let's talk about what we're really trying to do with this. another reason why I find this so inspiring is that these people are unique. A girl who bakes mud cakes, I mean, they're all just kid stuff and nobody's really breaking out, but at the same time, they are so much who they are. And to me, that has a lot of similarity with queer people, because at least in my mind, and I don't know if this is true for everyone, but in my mind, it seems to me that any decision that you make that is against the grain of society is one that you don't undertake lightly. Um, and if it's one that you have to wear as openly as being gay or being trans, or I mean, honestly, I don't have a badge that shows my sexuality or anything, and I don't come off in any particular way. I get to pass, but so many people, I mean, it takes a huge amount of courage, and it takes a kind of thinking and honesty about what it is you are, about who you are, that a lot of people don't go through. That a lot of people, when told by their mother to go put away the mud cakes, or that that building things isn't appropriate, or that they whatever it may be, um, that would have been the end of it. But there's so many people. There's a lot of people, I think, at the time of this book was written, for whom that was the end of it. And one of the reasons why is because there was not a good place for them to be. So that, I think, is one of the things that I want to do, is that I want to bring this in as a safe space, tiny home community. Now, the way that I envision it, just in a short nutshell, it is most likely, just for the sake of Florida and zoning, set up as a trailer park, so that each one would need to be on a very small kind of would need to be on a fairly small platform. But that said, I see each one being parked next to a large deck, which is an outdoor space that goes along with the tiny home. If you've seen many of these tiny homes, they are not trailers. They might be on wheels. They might qualify as trailers. They are not trailers. And what I see is designed so that as you drive onto the property, whatever property it may be, there is a main road that comes on, and then other roads that branch off, and that the roads branch off to what is essentially a circle. And the circle goes around the outside of where all the houses are. The houses are parked facing inwards, creating a sort of common area in the center. One or two of the houses is something else, but is basically is a common space. There probably could be anything from cooking area, which is not a bad idea at all, but a variety of things. And then outside, a stage for some folks, definitely a fire pit. I actually like the idea of having the cooking area being outside, but that's workable in some regions and not in others, and just kind of depends on where things all end up. But the idea is that there's a large common space, and that perhaps the people who are like, for example, what about this? How about one of the groups is a band, and that you have a circle of 4 to 6 homes, and they're all different members of the band, and the common spaces where they practice. I mean, whew, okay. So anyway, I'm thinking, depending on the size of the property, depending on how well what's going to work, you would have anywhere from 3, 2 to maybe even 5, if you had a really big space property, of these circles where they were all just kind of working, where each one had their own little community. And I think that that's one of the things where you have the opportunity of having that small community of the people who you're really close with, but also having a larger community that you have connection with. So, anyway, but that's Andrew Henry's Meadow. It's inspired me. I hope it isn't. I do hope to be making something like this very much in the near future myself. Alright,